Welcome back to Welsh Miniature Ball Gamer. So we're gonna paint up the 3D printed miniatures that I previewed previously in the month. So first of all, I've painted them up black with a spray paint to just get a nice even thick coat. Now I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna sort of do a very heavy dry brush of this metallic sort of silverish colour, so a chainmail or whatever colour, just that sort of metalish colour, and I'm going to try and hit 90% of this model, just really keeping it out of the real recesses, etc. I could have just painted the all of the metallics. Looking back at it, this wasn't really a time-saving way of doing it, but this is how I painted them up anyway. So I did a very heavy dry brush of the silver. I would say more of an overbrush than a dry brush, to be honest. It went on really kind of a bit too a bit stronger than I would have expected. But you know, that's the thing, you do these things and you roll with it. You know, I can always knock things back and paint over stuff. So it took me like 2 hours to paint 2 miniatures, so that's like let's say an hour per miniature. So yeah, I think that's a fairly decent thing. I usually paint in slightly larger batches so that I can get things done a bit quicker, but you know, for painting these up for you to see how I do it, that's how long it took me. So my usual go-to colour to get the base tones of the orc skin is this reflective green by Vallejo. So I'm going to use that to pick out any skin that I can see to get a nice base coat on it. It doesn't really matter if it's a bit blotchy or if the black is shown through, because obviously black is a very strong colour, for lack of a better word. So you know, it doesn't matter if the black's going to show through a bit, because we're going to be using washes, etc. And you know, we will tidy everything up a bit later, but for now let's just get some green on the skin so that we can start actually seeing what we want done. So this is kind of the way I paint up, is I try and block in the colours first, and then I'll get a bit more technical and a bit more like highlights, lowlights, etc. But you know, painting by numbers, you know, you paint the blocks first and then you come in and you do anything technical you want to do, you know, later on down the track. But skin is a good way to sort of get that done, because if you mess up the skin, you know, that's going to be a problem. So try and get the skin done, because it's usually the deepest recess too, so it's under and overhangs, etc. So yeah, getting inside the helmets, I don't worry if I hit some of the the helmet, etc., or if I get a bit on certain objects, because I can always tidy it up as long as I get this green on the skin, etc., because that's going to be the hardest part done once I've actually got inside the detail. So next we go with this sort of very chocolatey brown, so flat brown I think they call it for the Vallejo. I'm trying to get it to show you, but yeah, take my word for it, I think it's flat brown, and it's just a very dark, nice chocolatey brown. It's a good brown to work from, you know, to build up, and it will cover the black quite nicely. So think about the leather items that I want to have this colour, so this coat, or undercoat I suppose it is going to be painted that colour. I just carefully go around, just getting up to the metallics. Again, I'm not that worried if I get it on like the fur trim, because I'm going to be painting that fur trim later, so it doesn't really matter. You know, I'm very much like that. I paint, and if I hit things that I haven't painted yet, it doesn't matter, because I'm going to be painting over it anyway. So yeah, just go around and paint the colour that you're using, and don't worry too much about hitting things that, you know, you haven't started yet, because really you'd rather get this brown on it than have like the wrong colour showing through, say, so like the silver showing through on something that shouldn't be silver. So yeah, I'm going to use this colour also to go through and paint like the belt, etc. I've been a bit more careful here because I don't really want to get it on the armour, though if I do I can always, you know, wet my brush and clean it away with a damp brush or even a soaking brush and just soak it out. But yeah, it's fairly easy to keep it in line here. The belt is quite broad and quite easily visible, you know, you can see where you're meant to be going, etc. So while I'm at it, I can see that he has this fur trim over his shoulders. I'll paint this brown as well. While I'm here, I may as well use the same colour, and I can always change the colour and the texture of it to make it differentiate from the leather belt and the leather undercoat of this armour. I think that's the thing about trying to do a few miniatures at the same time. What saves you a lot of time is using the same colours, but then changing the texture and, you know, the end colour by using different washes or, you know, dabbing, you know, stippling, whatever, you know, just to make it look different, although it is actually the same colour. So at that point, it's kind of what they look like. The other one, so we're going to have a look at him and see what we think, where we can use anything. So I'm gonna, with this, I'm just sort of touching up any of the green that I need to touch up on the skin, just to make sure that it isn't, you know, too blotchy, although like I said, the washes is going to really solve this problem. Then we're going to go with a pale sand or an off-white of some sort, it doesn't really matter what. And this is the sort of thing that I use to pick out skulls. So this guy has got his lucky mascot skull, which he's got hanging from his belt here. So I'll paint that up in this sort of off-white, sort of sandy. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. We're going to be washing it, and we are going to be bringing the colour back up, etc. As long as it's sort of like bone-ish or bone-adjacent, it doesn't really matter. But obviously, because we're covering quite a dark colour, this is going to take a few coats. But, you know, I generally put on paint too thick. I usually do, and I can get coverage quite well, but it might seem a little bit blotchy. It's just one of those things, you know, I'm not going to be spending days painting, you know, a rank and file dude, and the coverage looks pretty decent. So while I'm here, I might think about trying to pick out the teeth, etc. But for now, I think it's probably going to be a job for later, you know, once I finish the skin and all. I do notice that they got some of these bones hanging from their belts, etc. So I'll catch them while I'm here. Just draw them in. Just being careful not to hit the armour, because we've already done the armour, so we don't really want to have to go back to doing it. Because these are standing, obviously protruding from the armour, they're not too hard to hit without hitting the armour. So, you know, just basically almost like a dry brush you can do over the top of it, because you're not actually going into the detail. It's protruding like object, so you shouldn't really have too much problem doing that quite quickly. So I'm filling in with this metallic some of the armour, which I missed when I was doing that sort of heavy dry brush. I'm just going to bring the armour back up so I can get, you know, get it quite nice and shiny for now. Because some of it, when I was doing that sort of heavy dry brush earlier, I missed a load in the shadows, so I'm going to try and pick out the bits that, you know, were covered by other parts. That's a bit shiny, I know, but we will solve that with some wash afterwards. So I'm going to do his little, I don't know, booty covers. He's got those little like covers for his little toesies to keep them protected. So we do that in that metal as well. And then we've got this black, and we're going to come back in and pick out the fur line of his undercoat, and just tidy up anything that I think is in the shadow, etc. So under his long coat, etc. You're not going to see under there, so maybe paint it black, because then it's a deep shadow and you can't see it, so don't worry about it type thing. But yeah, we're going to paint the fur line and get that nice and uniformed before we move on. There's my cup of tea coming. My wife kindly bringing me a cup of tea. So yeah, we're going to do it on the legs as well, just to keep them clean and have a nice sort of, because the legs are so shadowed, I might even keep them black. We'll see as we carry on. So he has these leather wraps, so we're going to paint his leather wraps black as well. I usually paint them like a bandage colour, or a lighter brown, or a lighter cloth colour, but that wouldn't really suit this guy, I don't think. So we're going to paint them black, and we'll have them as dark leather wraps instead of cloth. While we got the black out, I'm going to paint in his cool little top knot that he's got, very sort of Gareth Bale-ish on top of his head, and we're gonna just tidy up the leather trousers that he's wearing. So we're just trying to avoid the metal armor, which is obviously on top of the boots. So that's kind of where we are at this point. Getting lots of blocked colours in. We're not really going into any, details or anything at the moment. We're just getting the basic colours. So now this is the first wash that we're using. We're using like a null oil. This is kind of my null oil, because I've used the null oil and I mixed in some speed paint black and some of the speed paint medium. So it's quite a heavy null oil. But I just painted all over it, and if it looks a little bit thick or a little bit too dark, I'll keep it moving so it falls into the recesses of the armor. So you can see that's really dark, so I'm working it out to try and get it a bit thinner on the model, and just keep working it and working it and working it around, and it will slowly thin out. Now I do want it to be quite dark metal armor, so I'm not too worried about it being too dark, because I don't think they're going to have very shiny, non-blacked armor. I think their armor is very sort of blacked. So I'm going to put this over the skin. I'm putting the black all over the skin to get some shadow. Because it's like a wash, it will seep into the shadow areas, the underlaying areas, and we keep that nice green, which is now going to be a bit more grungy looking, which is good because we're going to use that as our shadow. And we've also got the base color, so that's like 2 colors already, and we can come back with the base reflective green, and it will be like a third color almost. So we got this speed paint, this brown speed paint, which we are going to be using. I'm going to go over the brown areas just to give them a bit more interest, because it was very flat as it was. So as you can see immediately with the speed paint, it's sinking into the deeper recesses and giving us some nice color variation. And that's really what we want. The more realistic a thing looks is the more sort of colours it's got in it, which is kind of a weird way of thinking of it. But yeah, nothing is just one flat colour. That's very strange if you see that. So I'm being careful to hit the belt and all the brown items that I have on this miniature, so I don't have to add too many colours or clean up at this point, especially around the armour, because obviously I've just put the wash on. I don't want to hit my speed paint into that wash because it will drag it out with the wash. So if you have time, you could wait make sure your wash is dried before you go in putting speed paint near the wash, but I didn't really want to spend that time, so I'm immediately jumping in to this. So I'm going to paint the inside of the shield. Now, it was black, and I'm using this speed wash brown over it, so it's not going to show off greatly because you know, it's going over a darker colour, but that's kind of what I want. I want it to be very subtle. You know, it's not black, but there is, you know, it is the colour of the shield, but it's very shadowed on the inside because, you know, you're not going to really see it, and I don't really want your eye to be drawn to it, but I do want some brown so it doesn't look abnormally black. I don't want it to look like it's sort of a black hole sucking in all the light, etc. So then we've got this flesh wash, which I think maybe it was the wrong wash to use. I do love flesh tone wash, but I think maybe a sepia would have been a little bit better. But I'll put this on all the bone items. So this his emotional support skull, which goes on his hip. I'll paint that over with that just to give some shadow. You could have painted it over with the non-oil while you were there, but yeah, I rather go for the earthy tone for bone, etc. So what I'm doing here is coming back and just picking out the wash so it just sinks into the recesses. So I'm cleaning like the panels to make it pop a bit more and keep it a bit cleaner. So I'm going to use again the skin wash on all of the bones that he's got hanging off his belt. Almost looks like, you know, a wind chime that he's got on his belt. And then I'm coming back with our reflective green, our skin colour, original tone. So now we've got an extra tone using the same colour as we started with, because we've of course done the wash. So we're going to hit all the highest areas. So, you know, the chin, the nose, the cheekbones, the brow of his head, because this guy's a bit bald, we'll catch the top of his skull as well, and his ears. So, you know, we're covering, say, maybe 40-50% of the model in this colour, just, you know, sort of getting him back so that there is shade and, you know, highlight. So yes, this is a blue-grey pale, probably one of my favourite colours from the Vallejo range. Now I mixed that in with that reflective green, so that's basic skin tone, and now I'm only catching, say, 10% of the skin colour, so the tip of the nose, around the eyes, the brow, you know, that sort of area, so I can get nice high contrast so you can see his face really well, maybe the tips of the ears, the knuckles, etc. So by using, we used the reflective green, we used the wash, we used the reflective green, and then a mixture of the reflective green and the pale blue-grey. We've used like 4 colours, but we've got quite a variation in highlight. I'm showing you my knackered brush here. I have to get myself some new ones, I'm just too cheap to buy them at the moment. So we come back with that sort of sandy tone to pick out the teeth. So I'm going to carefully do the teeth. Now that I've finished the skin, I really don't want to hit the skin too badly. So I'm taking my time and I'm just trying to ease the paint onto the teeth. Now, it doesn't really matter if you miss where the tooth was, as long as you've got a clean line, because your eye won't realise that you missed the tooth. You know, people looking at it won't be able to tell. As long as you're very careful and you do a nice line, it'll look like that's where the tooth was meant to be, and you won't really be able to tell. But, you know, try to hit the teeth. But, you know, small details like that, as long as it's uniformed, people's brains generally won't pick up that you've messed it up. So then you come back in and do the eyes if you wish. I usually do. I usually paint in sort of just the white of the eye. I don't do pupils, etc., because I think at this sort of distance where this guy is going to be standing, you wouldn't be able to see the pupils anyway. I come back in and hit the tops of the bones that he's got, his little bone wind chime that he's got hanging around his waist. and of course clean up the skull and add some to that. So he's also got teeth in his like helmet, so I catch those with this colour too, so you know it looks a bit sort of Kurgan-esque, sort of bone helmet looking type thing. So making sure I've got plenty of water on my brush, making sure I got a nice point. So this is using a grey. I'm gonna like put this over the wraps on his arms, just leaving the black in the recesses. So yeah, now the armbands are going to be like grey with black recess instead of it being black on black. While I'm here, I'm using the same colour to accent the black fur that he has around his arm greave. So I'm just doing like lines, just like drawing in a pattern that, you know, is kind of random, kind of is sculpted on the miniature, but is also kind of random. So I hit what's detail is standing up, and then I'll come in and just draw in some extra lines if it doesn't look quite right. So I'm going around, not that you can see it here, but I'm going around the fur trim on his undercoat, just again drawing lines like so, and it'll read as like fur trim because that's what it's sculpted as. So actually just drawing little lines makes it look like fur for some reason. I don't know why it works, it just does. So then we got two browns. So I got a dark brown and a lighter brown. So I'm getting the lighter brown here. Okay, so this again, I'm just sort of drawing in lines on the fur. Just, you know, draw. It's hard to explain really. You just sort of dappling it on and you're just drawing little lines, and it makes the fur look like fur, you know, it's thing. So you go along each part of it, drawing in the lines. Where there is sculpted fur texture, it's very easy to do. You just do it over it. But where the texture maybe goes a bit soft, you just keep drawing it in. Then I'm going to come into the undercoat and I'm just going to draw the highest points of the folds, just to make it pop a little bit more from the speed paint, etc. So it's going to look a little bit more eye-catching. Now don't worry if it looks a little bit too bright at the moment. Of course the paint will dull down as it dries out. So yeah, just getting the right sort of consistency, and then I'm drawing his shield. Now I'm getting it, keeping it quite, not quite a dry brush, etc. You know, it's an overbrush again. I want to get 90% of this shield covered, but I want some, you know, interesting texture, you know, a crinkliness to this paint. So see, like so, it's not a full coverage, but it makes it more interesting. There's something different going on. So with the darker brown that I was showing you earlier, same one actually we painted his coat with, we're going to go around and paint the base. Now I paint the bases like a brown because I think if my texture comes off somehow, there at least will be the brown underneath, which will look like earth, so I'm not going to worry too much about that. So yeah, carefully do that. Try not to hit the shoes because we finished his booties and all, and his little toe protectors. So yeah, just go around and get a nice even coverage, and that's them at this point. And they're looking pretty decent. So for our next step, we're going to come in with some wash, and again we're going to hit the wraps with the black wash, so you know, an oil, whatever, just to again bring down the greyness, because it is looking very sort of bright, so we'll bring it into a bit more of the darker tones. We're not really using this to give shadow, it's more to sort of glaze, I suppose, make the actual colour darker. So I go over the ponytail again with a bit more of that null oil, just to get it, you know, so it's a bit cleaner. Then I think this was, it was very hard to see, but I think this is called Middlestone. It's a Vallejo colour. I bought it originally, I think, to paint British infantry, I think, from World War II. They had something with that on it. I'm using this to hit the ropes that are holding his lucky skull to his hip. So I just carefully try to hit only the ropes, and try not to hit the finished skull. So then we get some watered down PVA or wood glue. This is actually what I use. I use some wood glue rather than PVA, and we're going to just go around all the brown parts that we painted on the base, so avoiding the stonework, trying not to hit the miniature. Because we don't really want him having fuzzy shoes, because it'll make him look like he's wearing slippers. So if you're having troubles getting it between the feet, etc., you could water the glue down even more and let it sort of flow. Yeah, that would work fine, you know, so try that if you're having troubles actually getting in there, but generally speaking, you just not focusing, but yeah, you just get it done and it will be alright. So then we got some of our basing mix. So I think this was Scrublands from Geek Gaming Scenics. So I dip it in and then I go around, brush it off the rocks, brush it off the feet, brush it off the rim of the base, etc. Just getting nice and clean. So then we got that grey that we used on the wraps. So we come back and I'm going to start painting the rocks in this grey colour. I could have done this actually when I was painting the wraps originally. It would have saved me a little bit of time, but not a great deal, so you know, it doesn't worry me that I've had to come back. But yeah, it would have saved me a bit of time if I had remembered to do this when I had the grey out originally. You know, it would have saved me a few minutes maybe. So you know, those are the sort of things that you need to try and think about when you're speed painting, or if you're sort of batch painting. You know, it's like, oh, where else can I use that colour, and try and remember, okay, yeah, I'll use that now, rather than come back and open the pot up again, etc. So then we've got this pale, sort of a bluey greyish colour. It's the same pale blue grey that we used to lighten the skin tone. So we're going to get a lot of it off, but yeah, it's not a dry brush. We are still got sort of 80% of the rocks being hit, but we're trying to keep away from the, you know, the overhangs and the shadow, etc. And if it doesn't actually catch on anything, that's fine. That's just an extra colour that is in the rock, which is absolutely fine. So then adding a lighter colour to it, we're going to hit it again, this time trying to hit only sort of the top parts of the rock, the highlights, etc., the edges, you know, trying to get it so that it's going to show the rock off to its best potential, I suppose. But yeah, trying to show off the edging. Right, so I got the black out, and I am going to come in and do the rims just to clean up the miniature. It's always a nice thing to do towards the end so that you feel like you've completed the miniature. Might take a couple of coats because, you know, I have got a bunch of gunk on it from doing other things. So then we get the sepia wash, and I'm going to use that sepia wash watered down quite considerably once my rocks have dried, and I'm going to lay it over the rocks, especially towards the bottom where mud would gather and taint the rock. If it looks a bit blotchy, you know, just dab your finger on or pull it off, you know, just to get it quite interesting. So like I always say, take this as you will. This isn't a tutorial. I'm not telling you how you should paint your miniatures. You just find enjoyment from painting, and what they turn out like is kind of not that important, as long as you found the enjoyment of actually painting them. So don't take this as a tutorial. I'm not telling you how to paint your miniatures. You should paint your miniatures how you want to paint them, and don't let anybody tell you otherwise. So if you like this video, leave a like. If you want to make a comment, I do reply to every single comment. If you want to subscribe, go ahead and subscribe. But until next time, it's going to be goodbye from me, Welsh Miniature Board Gamer, and enjoy your painting your way.